And I think that's a very important point that you're making, because the idea about irretrievability or insupportable, as you mentioned, it is a subjective opinion. One person gets to assert that, and the judge rules based on that person's subjective opinion. But I think the ripple effect of this subjectivism extends much further in ways that people don't really gather or don't really grasp the depth of. So, for example, when attorneys talk about the best interests of the child, what is the best interest of the child? Is there a definition somewhere? In our Texas Family Code, it's mentioned either directly or indirectly about 140 times. Not one place is the best interest of the child ever defined. And I guess it comes down to an attorney. It comes down to a child custody evaluator. Eventually, it comes down to a man or a woman wearing a black robe that somehow is going to be able to prognosticate into the future about a child that he or she does not even know about, and tell you what the best interest of the child is. And, you know, the best interest of the child, and if you go back to Troxel versus Granville, which is a case that I'm not even a big fan of, but nevertheless, it was a Supreme Court decision. I believe within that, they talked about the fact that the best interest of the child is to be raised with both parents. And my definition of the best interest of the child, very, very objective. The best interest of the child is to be raised in an intact family with his or her natural mother and father. We hope that they're surrounded by strong extended family and by a society that supports marriage. But the best interest of the child is not to be an orphan, or to be abandoned somehow, or to be split between two families. Or like one judge said, this family is not being destroyed, it's being reorganized. We're reorganizing the family. So now you have a child that has 2 or 3 fathers and 2 or 3 mothers and who knows who, and, you know, new sisters and brothers that are not from either one of them in some instances. But the whole issue about the subjective issue of unilateral divorce, I think that is like I used to call it, like I've often called it, the head of the snake. The head of the snake, we need to go after that subjectivism, and that gets rid of a lot of these other things. And I know that there are some people that want to keep no-fault divorce, and they're still fighting for their kids and stuff like that. But they've got to realize at the same time, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, or please feel free to expound on it further, the subjectivism that you find in unilateral no-fault divorce, one person stating that the marriage is irretrievable, has other ramifications that are horrendous in family court situations.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we have to realize that marriage is a social and public institution. You know, we generally like to, you know, raise the banner and say individual rights. And, you know, I very much support many of these things, you know, the right to bear arms, the right to free speech, all of these things that are individual. However, when you bring other people into it, you know, whether it's a spouse or, again, a family unit, then it expands to this social link. You know, you're no longer an atom in this universe. You know, you have social ties with other people, and that, you know, extends to your village, to your county, to your state, to your nation. And so marriage is the fundamental and the foundation for society. And the U.S. Supreme Court has acknowledged this in Maynard v. Hill in, you know, the 1800s. And so the idea, again, that people don't have unusual circumstances, of course they do. And that's actually one of the reasons why prior to even the general laws provisions in these state constitutions, if we have time, we can get into that. But, you know, prior to that, we had legislative divorces where divorce was dealt with on a case-by-case, individual-by-individual basis. And there were many reasons why that was concluded to be unconstitutional, because, again, marriage and family life are public. There are public interests involved that affect the whole society, not just you. So we have to realize that, yes, even though I have my own individual situation, that there's also broader implications beyond just yourself. And so getting into this idea of subjectivism, I mean, if we build a society and if we have a jurisprudence based on subjective viewpoints, subjectivism, or subjective criteria, we cannot survive. That's not what law is built on. Law is built on for the public good, for society as a whole. And whether it's divorce, whether it's best interest of the child, whether it's accusations of domestic violence, whether it's gender identity, whether it's sexual orientation, all of these things that we're seeing in society right now stem from a self-referential, subjective, me, the world centers around me way of looking at the world. And, again, when it comes to social issues, you cannot have laws that cater to individual self-identifying standards and criteria. And so that's the problem, because, again, it gets into the state's role, and there is a role for it to be separate from let's say, religion or the church, in the sense that the government should not be guiding the ideology of the country. The government is limited to regulating the behavior of its citizens. But once it starts to kind of infiltrate the realm of ideas and thinking and thought, through censorship and through catering to subjective criterias in the law, then I don't know how this is not going to end in chaos, because everyone views the world differently. And so if we can't agree on certain objective standards, then we're going to be tumbling down into a more chaotic and less orderly society.
So I think that what you talked about, the public interest versus the private interest, is very, very good. And I'm going to take it a little bit of a different direction, kind of the same direction. I hope to come back to this issue about general law versus special law, because we do have a specific place in our Texas Constitution regarding special laws.